Some events in Warhammer 40k fly so far under the radar that they go unnoticed for many years. And in this video, we'll talk about something that occurred that has the potential to shake up the setting in a major way. And while the events center around the heretic Dark Angel Cypher, the Lord of the Fallen, it is one of the lost Primarchs, the forgotten Lord and Gene Father of the 11th Legion, who truly takes center stage. It all begins, as many events surrounding Cypher do, with the zealotry and overreaching paranoia of the Dark Angels. And it all occurs on the day that the news of Roboute Guilliman's glorious return to life reaches Holy Terra itself. But the Dark Angels came to the throne world not to celebrate such important, galaxy-affecting news, but to hunt the Fallen, which they're obnoxiously obsessed with. They had no idea what kind of a can of worms they were going to end up opening, though. So you know how the Dark Angels will do literally anything to capture Cypher, and out of all the Fallen, they definitely want him the most? Well, during the events of Cypher Lord of the Fallen by John French, it is far beyond any line I'd assume they'd cross that they do indeed tread. The Dark Angels go so far overboard that if any other major faction in the Imperium became aware of their actions, it would literally result in them being deemed excommunicate Traitoris Hereticus Maximus. It could literally start a civil war. For the Dark Angels invaded the Imperial Palace upon Holy Terra itself, raided its dark cells, and turned their weapons upon the Emperor's own faithful servants, including no less than the Custodian Guard. It was conducted as a false flag operation, using livery that was not their own, indeed simply blacked out armor entirely, and consisted of a strike force led by a librarian named Mordecai, who was as zealous as they come. All were members of the Deathwing, and inducted deep into the most highly guarded secrets of the Dark Angels, including their darkest, earliest histories, such as the Fallen, and the civil war within their legion that resulted in the shattering of Caliban. This force was ready to die. Each one knew that if they were caught, then they would betray their chapter just in being known to have been there, and were thus prepared to take themselves out. And indeed, one of the escort pilots, a Ravenwing Marine, who flew one of the two fighters in that protected the Dark Angels landing crafts, suffered damage to his bird, and self-detonated his ship rather than crash it and have his body found. They were that serious. This was the blackest of black ops, and as a longtime Dark Angels fan, it was a blast to read about. So the Imperial Palace is literally continent-sized. It's probably similar to Australia in mass, and everyone on all of Terra is celebrating and distracted. After all, one of the Emperor's demigod sons, the 13th Primarch, Roboute Guilliman, has just returned. Now Cypher, their quarry, and the narrator of this story, is kept, along with a squad of fallen Dark Angels, in the Dark Cells, deep beneath the Imperial Palace, guarded by an elite cadre of jailers, the Shadowkeepers of the Adeptus Custodes, along with a contingency of Adeptus Mechanicus personnel who are there to assure the systems all work correctly, and to maintain and order about the servitors that operate within this most secretive and hardcore of prisons in the Imperium. There are things in the Dark Cells which, should they ever get out, will cause havoc and mayhem. Some that may even be able to destroy Terra itself. They are such a threat. The Eater of Gods, the Ender of Worlds, and other things, devices, beings, or knowledge are kept in the vaults of the Dark Cells. Not just beings. But yes, some things are simply weapons or knowledge so secretive and deemed so heretical it cannot be risked that anyone should ever see it. Cypher is one such a convict in this darkest of jails, as are his fallen brethren. But there's one being that is kept in the Dark Cells that was not mentioned in the Lord of the Fallen novel, but we know for a fact was there. And that is Subject 11. From the 9th edition Codex Adeptus Custodes, Subject 11 is heavily hinted at, and all but overtly stated to be, the lost, forgotten, redacted, purged from history Primarch of the 11th Legion. As stated in 9th edition's Codex Adeptus Custodes, the most learned of Imperial historiators cannot even imagine what treasures and horrors are kept within the Imperial Palace's vaults, archives, and jails. There are more chambers and cells than anyone can name, and much of what lies therein is so dreadful that they could bring about the fall of humanity, or shatter the sanity of any unaugmented human that learned of them. Relics of the Dark Age of technology, such as the Lament of Unreason, the Black Periapt of Rythanil, and the hideous Triblight Amulet, are kept under psychically charged lock and key, behind meters-thick slabs of gene-sealed adamantine that are covered in runic wards. There are also Xenos artifacts, some all that remains of civilizations that became extinct millions of years ago. The vaults not only hold artifacts and relics, however, they also hold beings. It that craves, Subject 11, and one of the Fell are but a handful of thousands. At times, the Custodes have even had to hold back the horrifying denizens of the rune-locked vaults from breaking free of their imprisonment. Now, the Dark Angels bit off more than they can chew when they breached the Dark Cells. They wanted to go in, get Cypher, and exfiltrate before anyone was the wiser. But of course it didn't go down that way. Not even close. Cypher, as usual, was able to make his escape due to a major mistake on the part of the strike team sent to get him. They damaged the systems that locked the cells. Like total morons, they totally broke the shield generator that kept everyone and everything contained within that dungeon. Cypher escapes in the chaos of the moment, able to reacquire his gear and get away from the Custodes and Mechanicus who had imprisoned him. While at the same time, the Dark Angels wanted to capture him and his dudes, they ended up having to deal with the Mechanicus, the Shadowkeepers, and try to escape the Dark Cells with their lives. Now, it was a lot more chaotic of a scene with a lot more going on than usual because of what I said earlier about the generators being destroyed that kept the cells locked. That means the cells unlocked. And the Shadowkeepers were called in en masse to deal with that massive of a breach. Everything they had been keeping down there, if it was able to leave its cell on its own power, was no longer hindered by being locked in its cell. The Custodes had their hands full trying to recontain so many inmates, I guess we can call them. And the AdMech was trying to help them, especially with tech-related beings and devices, and to also re-establish the force field generators. So, during the celebration above of a Primarch's triumphant return to the Imperium in its darkest hour, an equal and opposite action was occurring below the palace. Another Primarch was able to walk free and leave the captivity that had held him for over 10,000 years. This is why Cypher repeatedly reminds us in this story that the tale is not his. He's just there, just recounting. He keeps goading the reader the entire time, teasing us that bigger, much more significant events are occurring just beneath the surface of the narrative, and that he's already told us, but won't outright say. But I think I understand what he meant now. I like to read the books, sometimes make a video or two about the obvious, overt events, themes, and tropes of the stories, but then as the lore percolates in my brain months, even years later, I get these epiphanies that shine new light on what I had previously read. And this one is just such a lore revelation. Yes, Subject 11 is most likely the 11th Primarch. Though, if you will disagree, this is pretty much generally accepted by the community as the most likely identity of the character. And yes, Subject 11 was kept within the Dark Cells. We know that right from the Codex Custodes. And now we know that the Dark Angels caused a breach in the Dark Cells so massive it opened every unit, and the Custodes had to wage a secret mini-war beneath the palace to recapture and recontain the inmates they were charged with guarding and jailing. That's intense, but a Primarch is an entirely different animal from a Custodian. And he's been jailed for over 10,000 years down there, away from the Emperor's light, probably going mad in isolation and solitude. In my opinion, it would be very difficult, if even possible at all, for the Custodes to subdue such a creature, and we know that there are secret ways and passages all throughout the areas beneath the palace. Cypher and his Fallen make great use of them in this very story. There's no shortage of places to hide, jailers to attack and retrieve weaponry from, distractions in the form of everything from the dead gods of dead ancient civilizations to men of iron to greater demons. This is the perfect storm for the 11th to make his escape, to slip through the cracks unnoticed by nearly all in the Imperium. Shadowkeepers would be spending what sounds like eons just trying to contain again what they had accumulated over the many millennia. Thousands and thousands of chambers in the Dark Cells, plenty of time for the Primarch to make his escape and find his way out. And the Imperial Palace is so empty, so devoid of people, as they are all gathered in massive event spaces celebrating the return of Guilliman, that nobody even notices the insane war that breaks out between the Dark Angels, Fallen, and Custodes. Oh yeah, the Officio Assassinorum gets in on it too. Yes, I think that the Forgotten has been shackled in the dark, all but forgotten except by a handful of custodian jailers. If even they remember. Lost to time, lost to humanity completely, censured and chained in the dark for millennia, he's finally able to leave his cell, and I don't think there's a force in the galaxy other than perhaps his father who could compel his return to captivity. I'd say that after 10,000 years of prison, he'd rather die than go back there, and thus have a situation where we see the alchemical maxim playing out. As above, so below. One Primarch, beloved of humanity, returns. A great fanfare takes place as the Imperium rejoices. Another returns on the same day, crawling his way out of the darkest place in the Imperium, unknown, unremembered, cast off and expunged into an Imperium 1,000 times more corrupt just on its face than anything he ever did to earn the Emperor's ire and receive his wrath. But there's also this to consider. Cypher points out that the entire story, which culminates in him entering the throne room only to have the Emperor's will dictated to him by a custodian in his death throes, a last act of an indomitable Super Praetorian, the entirety of events were all fated. All part of a grand cosmic plan, originating from the God Emperor himself. Now Cypher was going to use his blade, which he notes may or may not be the Lion Sword and may or may not be the Sword of Luther, to cut down the Emperor and free him from the throne. And we know that would have gone very, very wrong, but he ultimately serves the Emperor and leaves, hearing only the Master of Mankind's words, "Not yet." It wasn't "don't do it," it was "not yet." Cypher fully believes the Emperor's will was at play in a major way, and events could not have occurred any different than they did, which then would also apply to the Emperor's 11th son getting out to stretch his legs. I can't say what happened from there, but I can say there is not a snowball's chance in hell the Custodes were putting 11 back in jail without a fight. And I'm willing to bet at that point it would be a fight to the death. Thus we can conclude that one of two things definitely occurred. Either the Shadowkeepers killed him and he's truly dead in the Warhammer 40k lore now, a move that I doubt Games Workshop would make, but is a possibility. But more likely, the other option is that he escaped just like Cypher did, as the Custodes and Admech were both ill-equipped to deal with the breach and reluctant to let news of it out, thus reluctant to call for help. I mean, how do you call for help anyway? Hey, Imperial Guard, come downstairs. Way downstairs. To the secret prison you don't know exists but will be mind-wiped for even hearing about, or more likely, turned into a servitor. Occam's razor tells me that Primarch 11 did indeed escape the Dark Cells. The war between the Fallen, the Deathwing, and the Custodes was distracting enough that he could have walked right out the front door, especially if armed. We also don't know yet what his particular Primarch powers are. Who knows? If he's anything like Corax with his wraith slipping, or Alfarius with his ability to make you perceive him however he wants to be seen, he has the power to get out of there unnoticed. Cypher was right. There was more going on in Lord of the Fallen than his own story. The forces that will shape the galaxy in the not-too-distant future are coming forward, and setting the board for the greatest galactic chess match, or game of Warhammer 40k that has ever been played. Now, if you want to know more about the 11th Primarch, then check out this video where I talk about the name he was intended to have. There's a lot more to know about him than you'd think, as the Forgotten and the Purged, the 2nd and 11th, appear no less than 44 times in the lore. Oh wait, 45 actually. The 2nd appears in Feet of Iron as well. Thanks for watching.